It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday, and I've selected a bunch of comments. I have no idea how many I'm going to get through. I'm going to try to get through as many of them as I possibly can, but the power fantasy discussion this week was just so profoundly fascinating that I've determined I could probably do a multi-episode series just on power fantasy. There's so much to unpack. It's kind of fascinating. No solid answers though, but really interesting dialogue. So if you want to do more of this, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, because, there's no money in a good comment section, but God, is it great for my peace of mind. Okay, so a bunch of like a bucket of comments on female power fantasies. Edmundo Lastra is saying, what exactly is it? He says, so for male power fantasies, we want the main character to end up being seen as a good guy for what he does. Is the end goal the same for female power fantasies? Basically, yes. For me, yes. The thing that confuses the issue is that as I touched on, power fantasies are basically about either conforming to ideals and being rewarded for that, or not conforming to ideals, but basically getting superpowers and being rewarded for that. And, women, because women are people, want that the same way men do. We want to be seen as good by somebody for who we are. I would guess I'm terrible to ask. I'm the wrong person because I'm not sex typical. But it's the Frozen thing again, that a lot of female power fantasy is about being allowed to express who you truly are, and be liked for that. It's, like I said, the core of Frozen, but, Elsa's true self is sort of manifested through her power that everybody's afraid of. So while she's making, like, ice palaces and everything like that, she's singing, be the good girl you always have to be, which is basically what her parents have told her, right? And then it's let it go. And all of a sudden she's herself. She's letting her power out, everything like that. It's not subtle. It's not at all subtle, especially when using the metaphor of the Ice Queen, because Frozen is an adaptation of the Snow Queen, which has nothing at all to do with the original fairy tale, but that's Disney, right? It's a core of a lot of Katy Perry songs. It's definitely a core of a lot of Taylor Swift songs, by taking that longing, wronged young lady and putting her front and center. She's creating sort of a nobility, but also kind of a revengey power dynamic in that none of them are perfect. And that's the problem with this stuff, is the way society handles women. Masculinity is complex, more complex, as I said, than we give it credit for. But the handling of society with femininity is just so fucked up, because it's so private sphere. It's so internal that it becomes very complicated to turn it into a metaphor for this purpose. People dunk on the damsel in distress and all that stuff, but the damsel in distress was supposed to be a shorthand for innocence, that instead of it being prisoner of war, which is a different thing, the bad guy kidnaps somebody who is so innocent and virtuous they couldn't possibly have deserved it, therefore indicating the bad guy is a bad guy, or a bad woman, or a bad person, right? Because because these metaphors are so messed up, it becomes very difficult to encapsulate female power fantasy. And it is sort of that, the closest you sort of get is that high school, that sort of 80s high school drama or college drama when the mousy nerdy girl likes a guy, pines after him, he's interested in the cheerleader. I said it was a Taylor Swift song, right? She wears short skirts, I wear sneakers, she's cheer captain and I'm on the bleachers dreaming, can't you see the one that I'm the understand? I messed that up. Can't you see that I'm the one who understands? You've been here all along, why can't you see you belong with me? That whole thing. A female power fantasy is when the guy finally sees, right? Like, you take every sort of Taylor Swift album and, like, it's a snapshot in that movie, right? Because then at the end, it's like, hate is gonna hate, 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 hate. That's the end of the movie, right? Because then the mousy girl ends up with the dude because he appreciates her for who she truly is. All that crap that people tell you that doesn't really work that way in the real world, because women are never, I'm not going to overcomplicate that. That was a joke that was deliberately reductive, right? Because, you get into that kind of female power fantasy of, you're nice to a guy and he'll notice you. It totally leaves out the male point of view, the same way a lot of male power fantasies leave out the female point of view, right? Like, okay, why is it always the, college jock, good hair guy in those movies that the mousy protagonist is interested in? Why isn't she interested in a guy who's smart or, but kind of nerdy, but nice, right? Now, more and more they are making that kind of jock guy the nice guy. But still, it's very much that it's not the, on the pecking order, the jock guy, the most popular guy in school is very much a status symbol for the mousy female character. And those stories don't tend to question why that particular guy is a status symbol in school. And if you unpack it, when you think about it, when you think about long-term earning potential, right? That dude, the guy who could go on to be the next, like, Zuckerberg and, Elon Musk or Bezos or something like that, long-term, the definition of the ideal guy changes as men age. And those guys are all possibly not very nice people. But you know what I mean? Like, we still treat high school as this, like, pinnacle of pure human existence. And it's so fucked up. Like, why do we continue to perpetuate these things? It's weird, right? And this is why Alfonso Fret said, please pardon me, why can't we enjoy playing games without political headaches? We all kind of hit that point. And I just want to say, when I talk about power fantasy, this is not politicizing. I come at it from the perspective of we want new and interesting stories. And because of the way games work, because of the thing I talked about with difficulty, right? We need to come up with new axes of kind of from weak to strong, growing in power, leveling up. We have to find interesting ways of expressing that in a game so that we can create new stories with new game rules and to create new kinds of victories. That's where I'm coming from. It's a structural game design perspective instead of a political one. And I think that tends to be why I get so misunderstood. Because I get that's a rare perspective in gaming, especially from women. We tend to be put out there to talk about being women. And I mean, this is one of the things I'm very grateful for on this channel. I know I kind of came up talking about women in gaming and feminism in gaming and all that stuff, but you guys have like let me branch out into more sort of design focus, like mechanics and dynamics discussions. And I very much like to do more of that. I just don't know how interesting it is to other people. So I try to use things like that to talk about, the structures of these things. But of course, you start talking about structures and people start thinking you're talking about systems of oppression. And that's not what I mean. Like when I say structures, I'm literally thinking about how mechanics work and how, a level is designed. And I mean, we call that gameplay, but it's really not. It's actually the scaffolding of a game that facilitates the gameplay. It's more design than gameplay, because gameplay is active, right? Gameplay requires the participation of the player, as if it's the chess pieces as opposed to the chess board, right? And not even, because gameplay isn't the piece, it's the player picking up the piece and moving it, right? This is why games are cool. They're very complex things. And so just when I tackle these things, unless I'm actually going, okay, this is political, this is structural for me. This is design. I am fascinated by the way games work. Video games are one of the few forms of media that, I am still not jaded by. I still find them amazing and magical, and it is because of that complexity. I got so jaded by television, it's not even funny. I like aspects of radio. I'm really jaded by that too. But games are really special. And that's a cool thing. And I wish that more people, I think a lot of the people who make games quietly that do not have, a big online profile for reasons, I think they still talking to them, they still see the magic that is at least possible in games. But the people who tend to pontificate about games for a living seem more like frustrated film critics or frustrated screenwriters instead of people who actually are like, these things are cool. Let's talk about them like they're cool, right? But I think that's something of a process of getting over yourself. Let's move on. But just to be clear, I'll keep that in mind to be more clear about it being structural instead of political. Because, like, for instance, this comment by Nathan Rudy, I don't consider this a political comment. I consider this more of a philosophical comment. Nathan Rudy says, but if we admit that power looks different than conventional narratives allow, it's something I said in the video, our entire conversation about power dynamics falls apart. And then how would we moralize how other people should be without examining ourselves? See, that's a philosophical thing, right? Obviously, we can look at systems to see, and we know this in games, if you've got various classes in a video game, you want to make sure that one class isn't super overpowered and another one's going to have a really tough time. And unless you're creating inherent difficulty through classes, like Jill starting Resident Evil with a gun and Chris only having a knife. But those have to be conscious. And that can extend to real life structures of people, organizations and companies and things like that. Are one group of people being advantaged over another group of people? I mean, the shining example of that is the thermostat wars that people have politicized, but it's a structural, it's a managerial thing, right? Because men prefer the thermostat in an office lower than women in the summer, all year round, but it's the summer air conditioning that's really the issue, because in the winter, women wear sweaters for the outside. In the summer, they're wearing more summer clothes, but men are still in suits. And it becomes this, sexism in the workplace debate, but it's really more about how about letting men dress more summer weight at the office so they're not wearing 3 to 4 layers of clothes with a thing constricted around their neck in the summer. It saves energy, right? There's an example. But yeah, when we, and I really think that gamifying these problems, like I've started doing this more and more. When I see a social problem, I'm like, okay, what's a metaphor for a video game? What's a game analogy I can use? How would that play out? It's oddly effective in terms of creating like good results. Crouchback says, a key point about gaming is that unlike other media, the player controls what the hero does. Consequently, the possibility of failure must be there even in a power fantasy, or else the player will feel no agency and no sense of accomplishment. I added that part. No agony of defeat means no thrill of victory, and difficulty levels make the game challenging even for experts. And then he went on to say, he thought I was wrong about Twilight. It's a very interesting comment. It's one of those things that's a over beers or scotch comment, and it would probably be really fascinating, but we don't have time and this isn't the format. Crouchback, I apologize. Megalopros. Sorry, there's an accent here and I'm not sure what it means. But I think you should elaborate on, I don't think Rambo is a power fantasy, and on Gears of War 2 isn't a power fantasy because of the camaraderie. You are just a grunt. The comment was longer, but I'm trying to get as many comments in. Another commenter kind of answered the question for me of saying that Gears of War is more like a loyalty fantasy, like many military games are. He quotes Larry Hama, who's a comic book writer, writes G.I. Joe, said, paraphrasing, superhero comics are power fantasies, military comics are loyalty fantasies. It's about having people who have your back no matter what. In Gears of War, the cool thing about Gears of War, I'm going to fangirl Gears of War again, okay, guys? Because I think the critics were wrong on the quality of Gears of War. Gears of War was dismissed, at least when Gears of War 1 and Gears of War 2. I'm not sure about Gears of War 3, because by that point I was hardcore, like doing my own content and tried to tune everybody else out so I didn't accidentally plagiarize. But Gears of War 1 and Gears of War 2 got ripped on the story because it was incomplete. It was poor storytelling. And I very much disagreed. Because what I found interesting about the game is called Gears of War, and the individual soldiers are called cogs. Symbol, 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 right? The thing that is cool about the Gears of War games is those guys spend so much time just following orders they don't understand, getting into things way above their pay grade, trying not to die, mostly succeeding, and being bros. I like that the player doesn't know the greater machinations in the world, because the Gears don't know the greater machinations in the world. Even when it's Marcus's own father behind some of this stuff, he doesn't know. It's hidden to him. And the nobility of being that grunt in this huge war that, there was a resource war before Emergent Day. And, it's not technical. It's not, snooty prestige writing, but there's this like blue collar, earnest authenticity to the way it's crafted and the way it supports the gameplay that is, it's a new idea in terms of, it borrows from the Gaiden story in Japan, which, of course, George Lucas also borrowed from Star Wars, Star Wars Episode 4, right? Just a snippet of the story. It's intended not to be complete. But the way they do it as part of the military, I thought was very cool. And because you're not getting too bogged down in story. It's go here, kill those things, collect this thing. Go here, kill those things, collect this thing. And it's so earnest that what Gears was allowed to do was focus on the relationships between the characters and the little bits of living they get to do between missions where they have to go kill things that are trying to kill them. As a novel or something like that, probably wouldn't work so well. But as a game, it's conscious and it works. And when Gears of War tried to get deeper and more meaningful, it to me became less because it was telling me too much and not letting me fill in the blanks for myself. And it was that loyalty fantasy that I really wanted, that the new games don't have, because they're all distrusting each other and they're all emo and all drama and all this. It didn't have what the first one did, the new games. And it's that loyalty fantasy. Now about Rambo. John Rambo is a really messed up dude. I mean, right from First Blood, like the first Rambo movie, he has bad PTSD. And, those original movies were made, way before PTSD was like talked about openly. Sylvester Stallone was way ahead of his time with that one, and that whole idea. But Stallone's always been good about, I mean, he didn't create Rambo, but he's always been good with Rocky as well too. Yeah, they're bloody punch 'em ups or shoot 'em ups. Stallone did have a screenwriting credit on Rambo. There you go. I was right. I'm like, is that right? But, and Rambo 2. All of them. I'm sorry. Anyway, Stallone's always been really good at, he knows what people want to see in movie theaters. He's going to write kind of a smarty pants twist on it. As opposed to a lot of those, Schwarzenegger movies at the time, it was all about Arnold. There's nothing wrong with that. Leveraging his physicality and then moving into comedy. But Stallone always subverted the beefcake trope in a way that took it beyond power fantasy. I mean, Rocky doesn't win the title in the first movie. John Rambo doesn't really win anything. You could claim it was like revenge fantasy, but he kind of just gets triggered and reacts, and then at the end he ends up in prison and likes the routine. Like, this, how is that a power fantasy? I don't know. Like, he's so out of control in the whole thing. Brilliant movie for what it is, but and this is why I think it's interesting to talk about this, because we don't really discuss this stuff. And quite a few people picked up on courage fantasy, and J. Patrick Pote said, I'm sorry. But a courage fantasy is about something internal, whereas a power fantasy is by its very nature about the ability to affect the world with more than the amount of power that one would normally have. Courage fantasy is having the guts to do something you're already capable of, more or less, which is what I basically, Dark Souls is more that. You got to have nerves of steel to even attempt those games. Imagifier said, the idea of power fantasy has generally unfairly conflated power with agency, success, or other positive outcomes. Power versus success. Yes. Power versus agency. I mean, normally in a power fantasy, you expect the main character to win through an expression of might. Go back to Doom, right? You save the world by punching alien demons, right? But as Imagifier pointed out, a lot of Japanese product like Gundam or Neon Genesis Evangelion, there's, they're mechs, right? Giant phenomenal cosmic power, giant robot suit, smashy robot, right? But then the characters have limitations of personal agency, social isolation, general suffering. I could ramble on at length about the different wartime experiences for different countries and how that impacts their fiction. Topic for another day. Again, could go on for hours. And then, okay, I wanted to get to this comment. One quick one before I get to the sort of final one I wanted to get through. Kate Toldness talked about how I hope that's right, Emma Peel from the British Avengers to be female power fantasy. You know, she's smart, beautiful, exactly who you'd want beside you in a fight. She also has a warm but non-sexual friendship with her partner, John Steed. She has a husband we never see because he's been burned, but he's alive. She's utterly loyal to him. She loved Emma Peel growing up, but a lot of women don't like her because she is clearly just there to be desirable. And this is an issue, Kate, I agree with you. This is an issue I have with a lot of retroactive analysis of stuff that came out in the 50s and the 60s and 70s through a feminist lens. More the 70s, but the 60s as well. The media of the time was reflecting the feminist movement of that day. Mini skirts were an anti-modesty statement. And now they're just there to be desirable. No. Yes, there was a certain amount of, we have the birth control pill. We can control our reproductive choices now. Yeah, let's fuck, right? Like, there was a certain amount of that in the 60s. Of course, disease kind of clamped that down for a while in the 90s. But it's coming back, but it's all like weird now. Yes, women for the first time were allowed to control whether or not they got pregnant, and being allowed to be desirable in that way and enjoy it, as complicated as that was at the time, and you know, there's a lot of coercion, but still, that was feminist at that point. The ability to be able to go, yeah, we're sexual beings too. We don't have to just keep our legs closed anymore so we don't have a child out of wedlock, right? Yes! They were there to be desirable, but anybody who thinks Emma Peel is just there to be desirable only thinks that about characters like Emma Peel and the Mortal Kombat ladies and Lara Croft and Chun-Li and Bayonetta. That's their problem, not the characters, because the character's desirable. That's all they see, and they don't see all the additional things, the depth, the nuance, the subtlety that is going on top of them being desirable. And you know how I feel about that. So there you go, Kate. Just a little bit of backup there. Stungunwall, I hope I said that right, or Stungunwall, I'm not sure. I feel so ignorant today. Stungunwall did a bit of a thought exercise and went from power fantasy to courage fantasy. And she, I'm not sure, jokingly thought, why not complete the Triforce and make a wisdom fantasy? And then they go on. But then I got to thinking about it, and wisdom fantasy is actually a very feasible concept. One that should become apparent all too much in current day and age. But what is it? Simple. Wisdom fantasy would be about having the assurance that you're justified right, or that your actions are inevitably leading towards your desired outcome. You don't have to worry about perverse incentives, unintended consequences, distorted wishes, or whether you're on the right path, right side of history. A situation in which the question, am I really doing the right thing, is a ridiculous question to ask. You have a clear, defined purpose and goal, and you know what you have to do. So on and so forth. Because reality is much more complicated. It's an older game, but if this is an interesting idea to you, I have to give a bit of gaming history and talk about Ultima 4. The second game that Richard Garriott published under the, what's the name of it? Was it Origin? own label. Ultima 3 was the first one. Ultima 4 was the second one. But the goal of Ultima 4 was pursuing 8 virtues and becoming the Avatar. And it was sort of like that. He was trying to get around the problem of, well, why shouldn't somebody just go and kill all the villagers in a game and take their stuff, right? And game ethics have really not evolved much, or they've devolved since then. And I mean, that's kind of nuts because Ultima 4 came out a long time ago. I'm not even exactly sure what year. 1985. Okay, there we go. I was looking it up. 1985, Ultima 4 came out. God, that's a long time ago. But Ultima 4 examined a wisdom quest, essentially. And ethics, not ethics in video games, like, not that. Ethical choice, moral choice in video games has really not evolved all that much. It's been variations on the theme that Richard Garriott did. All they've kind of done is muck it up as opposed to rethink what ethical choice or morality means, right? And I do think that wisdom is, one would say wisdom is a form of power, but I think it's an underrated form of power. And, some people went on, it was the same commenter that, Princess Zelda is associated with the Triforce of Wisdom, and Princess Zelda is kind of a disaster in certain games in that regard. Then again, Ganon is the Triforce of Power and always loses at the end. You don't think about Zelda too hard. But the idea, right? The idea that the Zelda franchise did of defining that courage, power, and wisdom are different things that complement each other, as opposed to it all being just about raw power and not about courage and wisdom. Like, I think that's an important touchstone too. And I don't think The Legend of Zelda gets enough credit in that regard, gets enough credit for identifying different types of power, because Princess Zelda just gets dismissed as a damsel in distress. Even though she's not that a lot of the time. She escapes and is sort of aiding Link. You can't take on the Avatar of Power head on. You have to be smart and sneaky and wait for your moment, right? Get allies, wait for a moment. We can do better. We are doing better on this channel. You guys are great. This is a really cool high level of response. And I know I've been doing this every week lately, but I don't want to take it for granted. This is a really, really good dialogue. And again, I actually look forward to Feedback Fridays now because we're showing it's possible, right? We're showing we can have discussions. And like I said, a few comments came out. It's like, that's for over beers. Which is positive disagreement, right? Like the fact that I want to have that conversation, that's great. But we're showing this can be done. And we're showing this can be done online. And I really think the first step is to just not shit on people who think differently than you. More on that eventually. But for now, I just want to say it's a real pleasure to read this stuff. It's thought out. It's properly spelled for the most part, which complete sentences and paragraphs. But this is deep. And it's great. It's like all you have to do is read the comments sections in my videos and you recognize a lot of the stereotypes about gamers are bullshit. But you're doing it. You know, we're having our own little wisdom fantasy here. The rest of the world may not see it, but we know it's there. And we can cling to it and escape the other bullshit. Okay, I'm getting maudlin, but you guys are great. You know what's coming now. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Have a great weekend!